Vacation International was not the first company I worked for, but it was pretty close there. And that's kind of my starting, where my career got started in IT. And I've learned a tremendous amount of stuff at VI, which is what they called it for short. And I wound up working there for 17 years. So it was definitely one of the longest stints in my professional life. And I've done a lot of different things at VI. It started out as a junior programmer, and then moved into um, more senior positions and project management, things like that. And throughout the years, there were all kinds of different needs. I mean, this is where I really get my um, experience in terms of working in IT and getting a very varied number of different IT-related tasks done. One of the things that we didn't have in the beginning is an easy way to even create screens, because we used, this pretty antiquated by today's standards technology. We use the old data point systems, which don't exist anymore, and we use an operating system called RMS, which doesn't exist anymore. And we use a language called Data Bus, which doesn't exist anymore. So it was pretty cool to learn all this stuff at the time. And also I wound up, in addition to doing regular IT tasks, I also developed some utilities for programmers just to make it easier for us to do our job. The company had 13 at the time. Actually, no, it was a little bit more than that. Eventually, they wound up getting over 30 resorts, mostly throughout Western United States and some in Canada and Mexico. And the concept is it's a timeshare company. So they were just selling these timeshares and buying or building buildings in various places so people could go on vacation. And so we had a very unique reservation system. It was the first company with points-based reservations, points-based timeshare systems in the US. And then later it was mimicked by a bunch of other companies, including such big players as Marriott and Disney. So it was kind of an innovative company in the timeshare space, started by two gentlemen, Bob Burns and Bob Regenberg, one of which unfortunately is no longer with us, but definitely visionaries. And as part of my job, I had to deal with accounting. That was initially the main thing I was working on, and we bought an accounting system. And it was horrible the way it was written. It even had errors, even right when we got it. And so we had to basically pretty much rewrote probably 80% of it. Most of it was written by me. And so I was kind of in charge, the person who didn't do too well in accounting in school before then. I wound up being in charge of accounting systems, computer accounting systems. And that's where I learned my accounting, actually. And so, they had all these resorts in many different places. And one of the challenges that I had to deal with was getting communication going between different resorts. So that was an interesting, in addition to just regular programming and design, I had to make these trips to these different places. As you can see, some were pretty nice all over the place. It was really tough, to go on business to Hawaii or to Mexico. I've been to Mexico about a dozen times. In terms of challenges with Mexico, obviously was the language. I don't speak any Spanish. And the people that worked for us, many of them did, but many of them didn't. So I had to actually use, in many cases, I had to use translators who spoke both languages that worked for us. And it was interesting to to put it bluntly and put it mildly. One of the interesting little episodes was when I got to Mexico one time to install a new computer system. They put me in this room, and this room, once I walked into it, I only had a week of time to get everything configured, set up, teach them how to use it, everything. And so I get into this room, and this room just has like one window and one door and nothing inside, absolutely nothing. There's no power plugs, there's no telecommunication. I mean, phone. At the time, this is before the internet used, so we used the regular telecommunications with modems. There was no phone line going into the room, nothing, absolutely nothing. And so that was interesting that, I get there on the first day, I'm in a total state of panic. It's like, oh my God, how am I going to get this done? I don't even have power. I can't even plug a computer in. And so one of the girls that did the translating for me, who was also resort manager's secretary, wound up going at 6 o'clock the next morning to the house of one of the gentlemen that used to work for the Mexican phone company. and she dragged him out of bed, paid him whatever mordida, as they call it, bribes. Basically, we actually had accounting set up with an account for bribes, if you can believe that. True story. And she dragged him from his bed over to the company, this little building, and within a few hours, I had my power for one computer, and I had my phone line, with horrible looking wires outside, but it was working. And at the end of the week, we had our communication set up, and everything was working the way it was supposed to be. So many different interesting experiences, many memories, lots of stuff done. I was working on contract systems. I was working on accounting, accounts payable, general ledger. I wrote budget system because the one we basically didn't really have one, so we had to write one. So it was a very interesting experience, very fulfilling experience in many ways. Met a lot of people, got a lot of stuff done, and that's what set me up for the future career in doing all of this stuff on my own, helping other businesses. So that's the 17 years at VI. Probably my most beneficial, if I was going to take one item and say that was the most beneficial thing that I did while at Vacation Internationale, was when the whole internet thing was just kind of starting out, the whole web experience. Most companies tended to shy away from that, and they didn't really know how to get into it. And especially companies, VI had 100 employees. It wasn't a big company, but at the same time, it wasn't a tiny company either. And so I saw how I could take the existing information about the availability at the resorts and put it on the web and make it available to everybody, from the convenience of their own home. Because the process right now, the way they had it at that time, was not right now, but the way they had it at the time, was that people would pick up a phone, they would call the reservation office, talk to somebody, and say, "I want to come." After talking to their wives or husbands or whatever the situation was, saying, "We want to go on May 25th, to this particular resort for a week." And of course, the receptionist was very nice and would tell them, "I'm sorry, we don't have availability then." So the person then had to go back and talk to his spouse or talk to his boss, figure out what other dates they could use. So basically, it's like working in blind, as they called it, to try to get availability to be congruent with what it actually is, what the desires are of each person. And we had by the time I left, we had close to 30,000 owners. So there's a lot of people calling to make reservations. So I thought if they could see what's available, they couldn't make reservations online, because at the time that was definitely not an option in terms of systems that we were running, which were completely off the grid. But I thought I'd come up with a automated situation where we would take and create these web pages kind of on the fly every so often, and then send those pages to a web server somewhere, and then people will be able to simply look it up and see what's available, and it'll make it that much easier for them to plan their vacations and empower them to do some stuff on their own. So everybody at the company, when I say everybody, I mean the top people, including my boss, just totally dissed the idea, thought that, not a bad idea, but, right now we got all these other things we got to do, and so on and so forth. And I knew I could get it done fairly quickly. So I said, I think probably a couple of days would do the trick. It's not going to take that long to develop. And I was just constantly in the back of my mind thinking that this would be such a huge benefit. I mean, if I was an owner and if I had this ability to see what's available before making the phone calls, it would make it so much easier. And it also would reduce the amount of time people, the reservationists took to deal with people, because there would be far fewer people you'd have to say that, "Sorry, we don't have it available." They know we don't have it available ahead of time, so they would only ask for things that seem to be open. So anyway, long story short, I walked into the CEO's office I did tell my manager that I was planning to do this, and the CEO was a good friend of mine in addition to being CEO of the company. And I just told him, I said, "Look, it makes sense to do it. Let's do this thing. I mean, I know nobody else has anything like this, but let's do it. And I think it'll be very beneficial." The answer was, the usual typical political office deal that, we've got things already that are in the pipeline. We can't be deviating from the plans and the current situation, blah, blah, blah. Usual corporate speak, that deal. So I told them, since we were friends, I told them, look, I'll come in on the weekend. I'll get it done on my own. You don't have to pay me for it. Would you be at least let me do it this way? And so, of course, then the guy was in the corner. He couldn't really say no. I mean, I'm going to do it for free, and it would be a beneficial thing, so why not? So he said, okay. And so then I did wind up, coming in, working over the weekend, and I got this done, and it took about a day and a half to write and get it going initially. And initially we had basically people registering to use the web services, which were very minimal at the time. And we had, I think, in about 6 months, we got maybe 200-300 people to register. After this thing went live and people started finding out about it, we had 3,000 registrations in about 3 weeks. I mean, it was unbelievable how people started registering for this. And the thing that I'll never forget, there was an email from this one lady, an owner, to send to the owners of the company saying that this is the best thing the company has done the last 20 years. And so that was my personal victory satisfaction that I did this thing. And there was no other timeshare companies at the time who had this capability. Eventually, obviously, everybody got on the bandwagon. But I'm one of the few things I did that I'm very proud of that was the first in the industry to do. And that was the availability on the web for Vacation Internationale. Right now, what you're looking at a modified version of it for a different company, which is much more sophisticated than the original I had. And this one shows the basically a calendar, and then these black boxes in each calendar represent when there is no availability. The green boxes, backgrounds, represent reservations these people have. So each person has their own reservations they can see throughout the year. And then also the actual numbers inside the boxes represent, in black here, represent the number of units available for that particular day. And if you click on the little select boxes inside the dates, then it gives you a way to select a date range. And over here it says click here to request a reservation. So you just simply select the 2 date ranges, click, put in whatever message you want, and it will send it to the resort as the request for those dates. So it's kind of a cooler version of the same thing, so people can see what's available. And that's it's called the planner, called the vacation planner. But that's a modified version of what I initially designed for VI.